I will now call order the special meeting of March 28th, 2022. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, first we have a presentation on the Court Street City Core zoning amendments with Michael Malloy and Eric Cousins presenting. Gentlemen?
Mr. Mayor and City Council, thank you for this opportunity. Just a recap of kind of how we got where we are today. I'll pull up the map of the area. We started this discussion with a proposed map amendment focused on the urban residential zone. You can see that in the map on the left. The comprehensive plan recommends a number of things in that area. One of the key recommendations is that we really look to take advantage of our existing utilities, existing traffic network, and look to increase our density at the urban core. One of the goals that came out of that comprehensive plan discussion as well is really to try to create opportunity for the traditional neighborhood businesses to be integrated also into those neighborhoods. That was a goal of the comp plan committee. We brought that proposal to the planning board. Another sort of, I won't call it a competing goal, but another goal of the comp plan is to try to minimize the number of zoning districts over time so that we can simplify our zoning ordinance so it's easier for people to follow. And with that, we looked at the T42, existing T42 standards of our form-based code as the one that most closely aligned with the goals of the comp plan for this new area. At the last meeting, the council, in response to trying to accommodate feedback from the public through the process, we had a lot of that. The council made some changes to that T42 district, I think with the intent for how they would apply to this new land area. What we didn't get into the details of is that those changes to the T42 district would also apply to the existing land areas of the T42 district. As we discussed that night, we've asked Mike Malloy, the city attorney, for some advice on the process of the options going forward. But I think that's a key element of when we changed from purely a map amendment, applying an existing set of standards to a new land area. When we made changes to that text, it also became a text amendment that has implications beyond the land area that we started out discussing. We haven't notified property owners in the existing T42 area, which creates a process challenge for us that we didn't do that. Very well intended, trying to accommodate the public feedback. But we have a couple of choices from here to follow that public notice requirement, and Mike can talk about the details of those.
Sure. Thank you, and good evening. As Michael Malloy, your city attorney, some of you I'm meeting for the first time here, so thank you. So the issue is that you have the ability to move a rule by referencing an existing rule and then just extending where that rule applies. So that would be the original approach of taking the T42 and then saying, okay, it's going to apply in this new area where the map has been proposed. That you can do tonight if that's what you want to do. But after the discussion last week when we started talking about changing the rule so that it could apply perhaps as a better fit in this new area, once we start changing that rule, that's what creates a text amendment change. And that's where we actually don't have text that's been proposed and that's gone through the planning board process. So while that's a great policy discussion to have and to talk about what you want to do, it's hard to say, okay, this is the rule we want to see, and now we're passing that rule, if that makes sense. So that's where I was of the opinion that if you wanted to start with changing what T4.2 would permit, either by creating a new district or by changing T 4.2 itself as an existing district, that would be a text amendment, and the process should be followed.
I'm sorry, so that was option one? There's the...
So you
the
have an
full suite
option,
of
you could extend what you've done and just basically apply T 4.2 to an additional area. That's option one. Option two is if you want to change what's permitted in this new Court Street area, then you would have to write a new set of rules, and that's where you would go back down to the planning board.
And the third option, though staff did not recommend, was modifying the map boundaries.
And the question there is, what are those boundaries?
Okay.
So applying the T42 standards to a portion of the mapped area that we've already discussed and publicly notified people of.
Is there any questions for Mr. Malloy or Mr. Cousins? Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, in other words, I know number 3 sends what we were trying to do to the planning board, but it's unclear if tonight we'll have the votes to do that. From what I understand, talking with constituents in this new area, they don't like the restrictions or allowances in the district. So that is why a good city councilor, after talking to his constituents, and we agreed to most of them, that it should, that would make it more palatable. And also, we were under the impression that after we passed it, it would go to the planning board for it to be fleshed out and to see if it made sense and if the people that lived in those neighborhoods agreed to it. And so now I'm not sure. I understand the ramifications of what we did past last week, how it's going to affect New Auburn and other areas. Unclear if it's a good or bad thing, and I would like to see the planning board to decide what fits each of the neighborhood's components.
Then I would thank you for that. That's a great question, and I want to be careful that we don't collapse two different processes here. If you want to draft new rules, either for the creation of a new district or modifying an existing district, you can propose those rules to the planning board. But your step here, it would be as if you're creating a new ordinance to begin with.
Right.
And so I would encourage the council to get together and draft that language that it wants to initiate and send that to the planning board, and then the planning board would vet that language, just as if we were starting with a fresh new ordinance.
So in other words, all these amendments that we've just now adopted and the original text for what's there can't be sent back to the planning board for rediscussion from them to flesh out the details?
You can send them the language that you want, but you were speaking of
Right.
overall high-level objectives. Right now, there hasn't been actual language, as far as I'm aware, drafted for them to consider. So your next step would be to say, here is the language of the new ordinance we would like the planning board to consider, and send that to them.
So
And if
the amendments isn't new language?
So if I could just add to that, we included in your packet a new zone text called the T42B that we believe accomplishes the motions, the effort to accomplish what the public was asking for in reducing the district, the density somewhat, and reducing the allowances for commercial uses, that you could choose to forward to the planning board for consideration. I think we've accomplished everything that was in the changed motions. We just can't apply that tonight to the new land area without that planning board recommendation.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions? Okay, I'm going to open it up at this time to the public for public hearing. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Unfinished business. So we have ordinance 11-03212022, a zoning amendment to the Court Street City Core of Auburn residential area, 1,687.41 acres of urban residential to traditional neighborhood development districts T-4.2. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion, Councilor Staples. Do I have a second? Second for Councilor Milks. Okay, now I'll open this up. This is the public hearing portion. So if anyone would like to speak, please step up to the podium, state your name, state your name and address, and please, limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anybody that would like to speak? You on?
Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Higgins. I live at 36 Fairview Ave in Auburn with my wife Denise, 2 wonderful daughters who attend Fairview Elementary. Lived in Auburn for 13 years, previously on House Street, remodeled the house there, and then purchased a house on Fairview about 8 years ago. The big draw of that neighborhood was that it was a spread out single-family neighborhood. And I'm going to speak to our neighborhood, even though there are many other neighborhoods who would be affected similarly to ours by this change. Since we moved in, Fairview has maintained itself as a spread out single-family neighborhood. It's quiet. People take pride in their properties, and I'm proud to live there. We bought there for a reason. Had we wanted to be downtown, we would have bought downtown. There's plenty of gorgeous condos that we could have bought. A city council memo describes the zoning area being proposed as small to medium-sized buildings with smaller front yards, stoops, and a more compact urban environment, and includes traditional neighborhood-sized storefronts. Considering outer Court Street, outer Lake Street, Fairview, Pinnacle, Amberley, to fit that at all is just unfathomable. And how it became grouped into this structure doesn't make any sense. Fairview is an established neighborhood with traditions and, dare I say, respect amongst the community. Take pride in our Halloween. We give people opportunity from less safe neighborhoods to come and trick or treat. Take pride in our decorations. Every Christmas, we all do luminaries. Why would we want to convert that area into just another block of businesses and multifamily units? Doing so will drive us single families out of town and create multifamily neighborhoods, which brings more traffic, parking, and crime. Gone are the safe neighborhoods for Halloween, neat yards, and Christmas traditions. For a developer to buy next to me and put in a 16-unit building is sickening. I heard Councilor Hawes, excuse my pronunciation if that's not correct, say that 80% of feedback was positive. How much of that positive feedback was from people whose neighborhoods are going to be decimated and property values decrease? Speaking directly to all my counselors, please vote with the established residents today. Not to spread out, not to, put a McDonald's down the street from our neighborhood. Vote to protect the neighborhoods that will continue to make Auburn a reasonable and desirable place to live. Don't vote to transform our neighborhoods into congested rows of apartment buildings and businesses. Thank you.
And as we're waiting for someone else to come, I just want to, as we go, we're going to try to pick some questions or clarifying points from what people said. Covenants, I'm going to ask at the end of public hearing for Mr. Malloy and Mr. Cousins, just to explain covenants versus ordinances too. But your neighborhood's covered under covenants, so. Anybody else like to speak? And if you could, to make it quicker, if you just want to try to file in line, that'd be great. Thank you.
Bob Hayes, 132 Allen Avenue. I think we're beginning to learn more and more about form-based planning, and I think we've all probably sought out more information, and I guess I did pull something off the web, and it's how form-based codes are written. And I just pulled a couple of sentences. One, the development of an acceptable and effective form-based code is dependent upon an active public engagement process that results in a community vision. The process begins with several public sessions, including visual neighborhood surveys, documentation and analysis of existing conditions, and identification of what characteristics are valued and unique in the different neighborhoods. Once there is a broad agreement on the vision, it can be translated into form-based codes. Codes can be tailored and customized to specific downtown corridors and neighborhoods. A code is not one size fits all. Actually, we followed the process earlier with a focus on Auburn's downtown, from River's Edge to the foot of Golf Hill. And there were many different, and we recognized there are many different age and characteristics. It has become apparent that Code 4.1, well, actually, with that effort downtown, there was narrated and escorted walk-throughs, followed by several public discussion forums. We really need a similar process at this time to focus on Auburn's residential neighborhoods. Recognize that there are many of different age and characteristics. It has become apparent that codes 4.1, and now we're talking just 4.2, do not adequately identify and address Auburn's numerous unique neighborhoods. And I think there was one other passage that I didn't write down, and essentially it says, in suburban areas that already have a sprawl character, FBC's form-based codes are not usually appropriate. Where the community goal is to maintain existing suburban development patterns, the suburban style zoning that created these areas is usually a suitable tool for maintaining them. And I was thinking that maybe this was going to go back to the planning board, which I'd like to see it. And I even found the suggested order to send it back, but even the writing that seemed to choke the planning board. We're not letting the planning board truly plan. We should go through this process of really developing codes that are recognizing the different characteristics of neighborhoods. And residential neighborhoods now, we originally started because of the downtown. Thank you.
Spencer Dunn, 530 Court Street. I have had the acute displeasure of attending and speaking extensively at the planning board meetings that led up to this continued debacle, and am here again to voice my concerns. It has become abundantly clear to me that city officials are unwilling to make substantive changes to these zoning proposals that would do anything to deter dramatic shifts in what market players will build if given the liberty to do so. Despite last week's feeble little list of amendments, little was done to substantively address density concerns beyond a negligible decrease from 16 units per acre to 14 units per acre. It is a laughable compromise that will do nothing to deter the building of large-scale buildings and multiple many-unit, 3-story rental buildings that will dwarf the over 90% single-family home neighborhoods and areas that they will get built in across all areas that may be changed over the course of this next year. Every greenfield lot over 2 acres and large underdeveloped parcels will likely be and are already being turned into large, expensive rental complexes, entering and often redefining top market rent prices in this area at the expense of existing prices and renters of all types. I also continue to be baffled on how and why, at the beginning of this process, officials and committees did not think to create a new form-based code district unique to the swaths of suburban land in our city they hoped to upzone in order to better fund city utilities and meet debt and budget obligations. While that is all well and good, some thought needs to be given to market players and their incentives and the existing scale and structure size of these areas. Up, zone, away. But consider and plan for the noise, infrastructure, and proximity concerns that can occur when dramatically different and disparate types of buildings are put on top of each other to meet and maximize the desires of developers. Density and height and overall size should scale up gradually within cities and towns, and certainly within existing neighborhoods. That is and has been a standard of coherent city planning. So why was there no creation of a new form-based code district, a T3.5 or what have you, a denser suburban neighborhood district with desired setbacks in keeping with development patterns that existed prior to city zoning, to take care of conformity concerns while maintaining height limits and upping density from 4 to 6 units to 8 to 10 units per acre, with childcare and elder care uses included. Better yet, why wasn't that the proposed suburban development district made into that and proposed for these areas? Where is the gentle density? The townhomes, the condos, the plexes, the small footprint, able to be purchased units on small lots and parcels that increase density, maintain affordability, and increase access while still expanding the city's tax base and utility revenues and meeting actual types of housing demand that exists here. This repurposing of form-based code downtown district types to previous years and context for wholly suburban and residential areas reads entirely as laziness on the part of city officials or complete lack of awareness and creativity. These concerns could have been addressed earlier had the city bothered with better transparency and halfway
Thank you very
competent
much.
outreach campaign and public feedback that extended beyond the Sun Journal and a tab on the city website.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Virginia Lavassa. I live at 20 Great Falls Plaza in Auburn, and my apartment number is 117, so I'm not here because I favor or don't want all this new production. But I'm here just to remind people that a few years ago, maybe 15 years ago, the people from New Auburn was here fighting the sludge dump that was being set up there on Penley Corner. We were all overruled, and it got started, and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden now we were told, I should read my own notes here. We were told that the sludge was safe enough to spread in our garden, on our lawn, and so forth. But, well, we all knew how unsafe that was. Now, farmers who accepted that fertilizer on their land is up Schitt's Creek, but with the Forever Chemical, let's hope that we don't end up with that in the lake. It was more for the Lake Auburn area if they were going to develop that. And because, in a few years, who knows, we might have water that's not fit to be drinkable and any more than the farmers now are not able to grow vegetables in their own property. So that's all I have to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Jeffrey Harman. I'm a resident of Ward 2. I live at 34 Vista Drive. I'd like to spend a few minutes not talking necessarily about the pros and cons of this proposal, but about the process and where we go with this to try to resolve this in a way that satisfies as much of the concerns that the community has. So from my perspective, I think before the council tonight, you have some limited options. You can send this back to the planning board, you can send it back in a restrictive manner, or you could send it back and give them some leeway to work on this issue. You could strip off these amendments, and you could ram through a T42 and apply it to this whole area. You're going to have a lot of dissatisfied people who are going to feel that their concerns were not heard in this process. I think at this point, I would urge the council to vote no on this and return this to the planning board. I think this is a highly technical issue. There's lots of concerns. There's the initial concerns that started this from some of the residents in the district are very well-meaning, and they do need to be considered. And there's probably changes that need to be made to accommodate those concerns. On the other hand, there is a wide variety of parcel sizes within this district. There's all kinds of different neighborhoods, and I think more time needs to be taken, and I think the planning board is the place that has the time, has the technical expertise to work with the residents, work with city staff, building on what the council did last week, which was to amend T42. They can then make a decision whether this should apply all to T42, whether T42B, as the city staff has presented, should be accommodated, and if they have a T42B, what the area is within this zone and what the particular changes might be necessary, including the things that were brought forth by Councilor Hawes and Councilor Staples last week, to try to make this more palatable. So I would urge you to vote no against the motion tonight and return this to the planning board for more work. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Elizabeth Dunn. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my husband. We live at 530 Court Street. Since the last meeting, we've had some time to carefully study the urban residential area that is currently being considered for new zoning. According to the data we've compiled by using the city assessing website, there are approximately 1,874 buildings on 119 streets in this Auburn urban residential area. 7 of those 1,874 buildings contain 5 or more units, which equals 0.37%, less than half of 1% of the buildings. 99.6% of the buildings, and I'm not talking acres, I'm just talking buildings, in this area contain 4 units or less. The development that's currently being proposed at 555 Court Street, Stable Ridge Apartments, has a plan of at least 5 3-story, 12-unit each buildings. As you can see from the numbers that I presented earlier, there is nothing like that anywhere in this urban residential area. And in my opinion, there shouldn't be. We do recommend that new construction can happen and should. And if we're going to create a 4.2B zone, the characteristics of that zone should look really different from 4.2. Otherwise, what's the point? We'd like to see it recommended that those buildings be restricted for 4 units per building. This would be more in character with our existing neighborhoods. We've talked about that a lot over these last few meetings. And as always, I'm still very concerned about traffic, and I can't stand here and not say something more about it. Court Street is a very difficult, sometimes dangerous road. More often than not, I almost got hit the other day just driving into my driveway. I can't imagine what that's going to look like if a development like the one being proposed exists with a 3-lane roadway entering it. Traffic going in and out all around each other and school children walking up and down the road. I really do believe that we need to rethink this, and I do hope that you'll put in the time to do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ryan Smith. I live at 11 Harris Street, and I know I spoke last week, but I'll try not to be redundant. My first question was with the third option mentioned earlier with changing the boundary lines. It says staff does not recommend that, and I guess one of my questions is, who is staff? And is this public record or available to us on who voted for that or against it? Because it could be one person and it could be 100. We just don't know, and I'd like to know that. Another part of this I want us to really think about when we send this back to the planning board is thinking about large lots that are largely unbuildable, partly due to FEMA. So if you consider, let's say, a 50-acre parcel and how many units you can fit on that, let's say apartment buildings, because that's what this is for, and if you only have half of that buildable, the part, if you're still counting that towards your units per acre, you can really double the density on the buildable part. So we have to really think about that and what that means, because otherwise, that's just a way to avoid having to pull the FEMA permits and do the work required to actually make it buildable land. So I think that's something else that's really not been addressed thus far, at least not in any planning board or city council meeting I've been to. So the 13-acre parcel that farmhouse was knocked down is obviously in the news everywhere, but I think something that really kind of struck me was there's a 200-acre parcel, formerly 200-acre parcel that surrounds the middle school. Just recently divided, I noticed on the GIS. I noticed a lot of boundary lines moving recently, and it shows a little dotted line where it was just divided, and that's really troubling. That's a lot of reality right there, because that surrounds the middle school. So we have to think, I live on Hare Street, which leads right to the high school. And obviously my home's a single-family home, and a lot of those in the area are single-family homes. And you can just imagine how different those streets would be if it was all 16-unit apartment buildings. But we also have to think, like, this is going to change how our city looks, but also, what do we want beside our middle school? Or what would be the best for desirability of Auburn? I mean, currently we could put pot shops. Do we want pot shops surrounding our middle school? Do we want 1,400 total units of multifamily development? Or do we want a single-family neighborhood? I think the best answer to that is a single-family neighborhood on quarter-acre parcels. I think that would be the best for our housing affordability, for desirability, for safety, for so many other things. So we have to think about that when we're thinking about this, because we can't think about this as what do we think is going to happen. It's what can happen. And I don't think that was really considered here. I think it was considered what makes more sense in terms of if you think about one single parcel, but you have to think about every parcel in this district. So one of the reasons earlier I asked about who is staff and who votes against moving the boundary lines is because I think that wouldn't be too bad of an idea, and I'm just curious who's against that and who got to make that decision. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak?
Hi, good evening. Jessica Klemick. I live on Briarcliff Knoll in Auburn. I also own additional acreage on Court Street near the middle school. I've stood up here at this podium now quite a few times over the last several months, really representing two vastly different groups. First group being those struggling to find housing, and furthermore, housing options in safe and desirable family neighborhoods. The second group being those reliant on this zone map amendment in order to make much-needed improvements to their homes or to help invest in our community through real estate development. We've heard residents express concern that multifamily buildings don't fit within areas consisting of primarily single-family homes. But that simply is not true. If other cities in Maine can find ways to create desirable neighborhoods consisting of mixed-use single-family homes, condos, and multifamily buildings, we can too. It can be done. It must be done in order to meet the growing demand for housing and in order to achieve Auburn's most critical goals within the city's comprehensive plan. The path of least resistance in this case may be the right path for some, but it certainly is not the right path for all. I would ask those homeowners concerned about the impact this change might have on them individually to also consider the impact this change would have on others, the people struggling to find housing options, the local businesses who would benefit, the jobs it would create, the tax revenue it would lead to for the city. We are really fighting against more than what we're talking about here. And what is that? What are we afraid of? Are we honestly worried about traffic and the impact to our middle school student walkers? Have we considered those students who are uncertain about where they're going to sleep tonight? Do we really think someone is looking to put a 100-seat restaurant on Dexter Ave or a McDonald's on Fairview Ave? Or are we concerned about what we might now see when we look outside of our living room window and it may look a little different than it did yesterday? New development can be a beautiful addition to our neighborhoods, a welcomed addition for our future generation. That vacant field may look really nice in your view, but should you be the only one to benefit from it? We're in a rising rate environment. Single-family homes are becoming less and less attainable. We need more rental options, and they shouldn't be limited to space between strip malls or hospitals. So with all of this in mind, I would ask the City Council, please take my points into consideration when making a decision this evening. And I would also ask those residents, my fellow residents, my neighbors, to please consider the broader impact before you continue to push back on this change. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? None being? I'm going to close this public hearing. No, I was pointing to you. I was gesturing. I thought, did you have?
I thought you were going to give me the gavel.
Oh, God, no,
So,
this
yes,
is mine.
I would like to respond. A question was brought up during the public hearing regarding who is staff. Ultimately, I am staff. I receive recommendations from our are professional members of our department. Those professional members give me their best recommendations on how to move forward. So when you look at information sheets that are in the council packet, you'll see that the author of those might be from our Director of Planning and Permitting, which in this case is Eric Cousins. Eric put what staff recommendation is on that. Ultimately, it's my signature at the bottom of that information sheet. So for the public and for the council, the recommendations from staff on tonight is to move forward with voting no on the original motion that was brought forward, and to send the recommendation back to planning board. That's the staff recommendation, so ultimately that is my recommendation. And so staff really does end with me, so I want to make sure the public and the council were aware that I support staff's decision and encourage the council to have healthy debate on that process and what you recommend, and then staff will follow through with your recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Cousins, Mr. Malloy, could you just come up to the table? What I'd like to do is to kind of dovetail what the city manager was doing. I took some notes and there's some questions, and yeah, at the end of the, hopefully I kind of got them all, at least the pertinent ones. But if I missed anything, please pipe in, okay? First, could either one of you, Mr. Cousins or Mr. Malloy, just kind of reiterate to the council and the public the difference between a covenant and ordinance briefly, and which supersedes which? And that might be better a legal question.
Sure. So you're talking about a deed covenant that runs with land.
Correct.
So that's a,
So, for example, Fairview, Pinnacle, Briarcliff are all covered under deed covenants.
so I'm not, well, I'm not expressing whether that's true or not, that's for title examiners, but as a general proposition, when you convey land to somebody else, the grantor of that property may attach certain conditions on its use by the grantee or by the buyer. And so if a covenant, which is a promise about how it's going to be used in the future, actually attaches to that land, then that would be a matter of private regulation of what could be done with property, just as a general proposition. If we remove any private regulation and we assume there's none as a matter of who owns the property and how they acquired it, then that's where government regulation would step in. And so the ordinance is a form of government regulation passed by the city at its most basic level.
So in a legal sense, I know you never deal in absolutes, but covenants versus ordinances, the one that's more restrictive is the one that prevails in general. So if the covenant's in a neighborhood and says minimum square footage of 2,500 square feet, no more than one home per parcel, no farm animals, no detached garages, which is very common.
What I'll say is the enforcement mechanisms are different. And so it's not as if there's an equal weighing of, one set of authority. You have, for a city ordinance, you have city staff, you have legal authorities who have authority under your ordinances and under Maine law to enforce land use regulations passed by the city. Property rights are generally enforced by private individuals, and there may or may not be individuals in a position to take enforcement action.
But if they did, they could, and that's their right, because it's a private right.
That's a matter of private dealings between the parties.
Mm-hmm. Okay, council, are we clear on covenants versus ordinances? The protections? Okay. Next question I had, second. Actually, about staff. Could we talk about limiting buildings by 4 units and traffic? When I say that, if we could, Mr. Cousins, explain a little bit the planning board process for any type of PUD. What would trigger a PUD by definition? And in brief, what is a process that a PUD or proposed project would have to meet?
I think any time that you get over 3 units, it triggers review as a subdivision. That's a statewide requirement. The subdivision law does allow municipalities that have a site plan review ordinance that meets certain criteria, and Auburn's ordinance meets that criteria, to substitute site plan review for subdivision review. And we also have, you mentioned the planned unit development ordinance, that can also be used as part of that review. It requires, there's a dozen or more standards if you're using site plan and planned unit development. or subdivision and planned unit development to review any development with more than 3 units or more than 3 parcels created. Requires notification to abutters. Under state law, Auburn defines abutters as property owners within 500 feet, which is a larger definition of abutters than what the state uses. It's not just immediate abutters, it's all property owners within 500 feet. Those property owners are notified. The applicant has put together an application that explains why their site plan, why their project, why they believe that meets the standards that are required of it in the ordinance. The planning board holds a public hearing. There's an opportunity for people to comment on that if they see a deficiency in those applications, and then ultimately the planning board has to vote on whether or not they find that the application and the project meets all of the required standards.
So in summary, and kind of lay terminology, or paraphrase this one, if in this turns out, in this 4.2, if anybody wanted to build a 3 or 4 unit property, abutters would be notified, planning board would convene, they would weigh the pros and cons to see if it fit into that neighborhood, so to speak, and before granting approval. Would they be checking for traffic, school population? What are some of the criteria that they would have to, or thresholds they'd have to surpass?
They're looking at traffic, ensuring that it doesn't create a hazard. We'll quite often get traffic information. We might not ask for a traffic report on a 3 unit, but on a 20 unit project, we certainly would look at traffic or larger. It's not an exact fit in the neighborhood. They're looking at the ordinance, what the ordinance allows, and that it's not a detriment or depriving abutting properties of property value is one of the findings. So there's a whole host of things that are required to be found. Wastewater, there's adequate capacity in a plan to dispose of wastewater. There's adequate public water supply or private water supply available. There's a number of standards to address those impacts on the community.
So just I want to summarize that. When an ordinance goes into effect, it does not mean there's a carte blanche change that can happen overnight to your own land or even your neighbor's lands. But there are effective checks and balances, or checks and balances in place, so that any project of sizable, quantity, over 3 units, 4 units, have to be reviewed A, by staff, or B, by staff and planning board.
And found to meet the ordinances. I think the difference is as we change ordinance, they can become more permissive or less permissive over time.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any other, that's it for the questions I had. Are there any other questions for Mr. Malloy, Mr. Cousins? We can leave them up here too on the hot seat as we enter into our debate, of course. Mr. Whiting?
Thank you. Eric, I was looking at what we did last week with all the amendments, and it seemed to be responsive to some of the public's concern, but part of my thinking about that was, if we need to make so many amendments, is this the right type of rezoning, the T42? And then I started thinking about my service as a planning board member for 13 or 14 years, and it seems like we're putting a burden on staff and planning board if there are going to be a huge increase in the number of cases that would have to go to planning board. So could you comment on that, please?
I think that the changes that were made last week were certainly an effort to try to accommodate that public feedback and make the draft ordinance changes a better fit for that part of town. I think we really have an opportunity, and why staff recommended going back to planning board is we have an opportunity to look at those changes, consider all the feedback that's been made publicly so far. There'll be more at an additional public hearing or a workshop, whatever setting the planning board needs to work through that. But I think we have an opportunity to make it better, to make it a better fit for this land area. And I think that a new zoning district can do that rather than applying the existing standard.
Thank you.
If I could, so, kind of looking at it from a policy standpoint and what we have here, here's the reality of what we're currently looking, strategically, I should say, because our rezoning efforts are tied to the comprehensive plan, which was fully vetted through public sessions, transparency, everything was online, the maps, the language, everything for a year and a half, Councilor Staples-ish. before that strategic plan, and many, many debates and council discussions, including council vote to the affirmative, as well as planning board vote on the affirmative to adopt the plan. So we have a comprehensive plan, which in fact is somewhat conflicted with the amendments proposed. So the comprehensive plan talked about density, it talked about form and so forth, it talked about commerce. Some of the amendments that were proposed are in conflict with that plan. So when we're sending stuff back, the planning board has to look at the comprehensive plan, as well as state law as well, to see what's in conflict and what isn't, because the comp plan is what's supposed to guide us for the next decade. So I see a circular argument happening here with zoning. That's point one. I want to make sure the council just understands their kind of this long-term reality. Point two is this: there is others, and we have already passed an order sending to the planning board for them to consider applying 4.2 to several other neighborhoods within the city. That I don't think that process has started yet.
Correct.
Okay, but that's going to start, and that order is specific on 4.2. So let's say we have this happening, we have a whole slew of other residents who have a voice and might have some very constructive comments about 4.2. Just different perspectives, but at the end of the day, the goal here, one of the goals that you've stated and we've stated, and we should in a practical standpoint, is make an even, fair analysis and application of zoning throughout all the areas of the city that are serviced by water and sewer and current infrastructure standards. And I say that because if you start doing this for each zone, it's going to take a process that is difficult and convoluted at best, and high anxiety and a lot of fear, and you're going to start changing zones to meet specific neighborhoods in such a way that one of the goals in the comp plan, which was stated and written, was to simplify the number of residential zones from 33 in 2010 to a more manageable 8. So there's understanding, there's regulatory consistency, and there's fairness. By piecing this all together, and we did this frankly because we just didn't have a room big enough to send a notice to 7,000 homes and all the 4.2 and get them everybody together and just be possible. Because I remember these conversations as a council, we wanted to split this up into more manageable groups that we could listen to. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there strategically. There's a need. 70% of the homes in this zone, and I probably guess, so we'll find out later, in the other neighborhoods in which the zone is being proposed are probably non-conforming as well. And one last thing, Mr. Cousins, how long has 4.2 been in effect in the New Auburn region? And could you give us a rough boundary of that, please? I don't know if you can pull up the map or not. But.
Yeah, so this map actually shows it quite well. This green area here, Goff Street, Union Street, Court Street up onto Lake Street, High Street, South Main Street, Broad Street, and the whole sort of grid area on the New Auburn hillsides is the existing T42, and some of those areas have been in place since 2017 and some of those in 2018.
So 2 to 4 years now, 5 years in one case. Okay. So has there been any tearing down of blocks and redevelopment of large units in any of those parcels?
We have seen some infill projects in those areas, but we have not.
Infill or tearing down and 16 units per acre?
We haven't seen that.
But there has been some infill?
Yes.
Has there been any rehabilitation or remodeling that under the old zoning would not have been allowed?
There are a lot of properties that were non-conforming, especially with respect to the front setback, and some with density that have been allowed to either add a unit or make improvements on the front of the property.
Have we had more than a handful or any complaints from neighbors in that area about rehabilitation or infill?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. It's been pretty well received.
I'll turn. Councilor Walker, it's your ward. Could you give us a little bit of and Councilor Milks too, your ward as well, down there in that area, in that Gulf area. Has there been any complaints about T42 in New Auburn or down in Gulf?
No, there hasn't. There's been a lot of questions, just like we had here, and a lot of, they were worried about there was going to be a lot of, this and that. It hasn't happened, and I don't think it will happen, because I think the people will come out and slow any kind of big growth down.
Yeah.
And I can say that because Lauren Avenue, there was going to be a development going in there, and that came to a stop in a hurry because the people came out and said, we don't want all them units in that parcel.
Okay, Councilor Mills, anything to add on that point? Nope. No? Okay, so I'm going to bring this back to the council. We have an order on the floor. Excuse me. I'm sorry, did you have your hand, Councilor Staples?
Yeah, this is probably a minor point with all the discussion that we've been having. I did get a call today from a constituent in this proposed zone who's actually right on the border. His property would be divided by this new zone. And I guess I just kind of wonder, why didn't we use property lines as the boundaries for, he was on just this particular property was 495 Lake Street. So it's on the northern side of, yeah, right in there on the, right at the top of that strip.
So we didn't create new boundaries. This is the area where the urban residential and multifamily suburban has existed. We could look at split parcels if you wanted us to with the planning board, certainly, and come up with changed boundaries, but we were really looking at an area that already had a 6 unit per acre density. Water and sewer is largely available or could be made available within not too long a distance. So we didn't look to change those boundaries.
In a conflict, let's say in this situation, and I think I read this, but you have a split lot and they're two separate zones. Which one takes precedence, or do you have to respect the zoning amendments regardless in their prospective zones within your one single lot?
You would look at the prospective zoned area and apply the standard, a different standard in each zone. The standard that exists in that particular piece of land.
Councilor White?
Question on form-based code. I've had a number of calls and emails from people largely Lake Street, Court Street area. And one of them was relating to form-based code. And the question was, if we're putting more units into conformity, aren't we taking other ones that were done since zoning with broader, larger lots and so on and bigger setbacks? Aren't we now putting those houses built since 1960 when zoning was instituted in Auburn in non-compliance with the form-based code? I mean, I don't know how big an issue that is, but it seemed like it might be a problem.
So some of the newer neighborhoods on average, have a larger setback from the street than what the new ordinance would require of new units. It really is an attempt to match the older existing character of neighborhoods, and we've sort of forced people to build outside of that character over the last 30 or 40 years. It doesn't change their ability to maintain their homes. They actually would gain some ability to add on in the front if they chose to. That would be individual decisions. In the existing neighborhoods, though, applying the existing more historic neighborhoods, applying the current 25-foot setback, I think has a more of an impact in that if somebody drove off the road and hit a porch, they may not be able to replace that porch. Whereas the new setbacks allow for use of more of the parcels. So I don't see that impacting the land use in the same, to the same level as the nonconformity with traditional zoning.
Thank you.
Oh, Councilor Moore.
Mr. Cousins, you just alluded to one circumstance. Can you list some other reasons for the public why it's detrimental to a homeowner to be in a lot that's non-conforming?
It is mostly because if there are repairs that you want to make to the portion of your building that does not meet the setbacks, you can't remove more than 50% of the structural members, or else that's considered a new construction project. So if your front porch is within the setback, and I keep using front porches because that's the most common issue that we run into with that setback, you may not be able to rebuild it. You'd have to look to put it on the side of your building, and that
So not, just for clarification, not the whole house, but the actual 50% of just the porch?
The portion of the structure within that setback. 50% of the structural members have to remain in place for it to be considered a repair rather than something that has to comply with the setback requirement.
In the same threshold if there was a fire?
65% is the threshold if it's a natural disaster, fire, hurricane, tree falls on it, that kind of thing.
So if a house fire, house burns to the ground, can't be replaced if it's non-conforming?
You could probably, in most cases, you could replace a home on the lot, but you very likely couldn't use the same foundation. You'd have to start over with a foundation that meets the setbacks. And I think that was not necessarily the case of damage, but we're preventing homes from being built in a character that people really saw as desirable through the comp planning process. Interacting better with the streets, being closer to the street to help slow traffic down, make the streets feel more confined, more interaction with your neighbors on the sidewalks, that kind of thing.
Which is closer to, when I think of this type of neighborhood you're illustrating, I'm thinking of Lake Street. Smaller, quaint, single-family homes, closer together, little neighborhoods. So this type of forming or this form-based code 4.2 would bring those homes into conformity, and that was kind of the purpose of the comp plan.
And to encourage the less developed parts of this land area to be able to develop over time as that traditional style of neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions before we enter the debate? Comments?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. So this obviously directly affects Ward 2. So last time, I made a bunch of amendments which I will say were praised and ridiculed at the same time. The amendments that I did make, I want to be very clear with what I'm about to say. Any one of us could have easily just raised our hand in favor to push this through. But how many, speaking for myself and Councilor Staples, took the time out of our day to listen to every single person that reached out to us? Whether we were able to get back to them or not is a completely different story, but we heard you. We tried to make a change in your favor. We hit a legal roadblock. So that being said, I could have easily raised my hand and said yes, but I didn't. I listened to you. Now, tonight, I'm going to make a motion to remove all those amendments. And by doing that, it's going to do two things. It's going to put me back in the fight, because if I vote no tonight, I have no say in this anymore, legally speaking. If I say yes, then I'm able to potentially bring it back in front of the council and talk about this again. So that is the reason for my decision. And by saying that, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion. There's going to be a few of them, so hold tight. I would like to make a motion to reconsider the following amendment that was previously adopted by the City Council at the 3/21/2022 meeting, that all bed and breakfast establishments allowed only with special exemption from the Planning Board.
I have a motion from Councilor Hawes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Councilor Milks. Any debate? None being asked for a vote. All those in favor of the motion to rescind, please raise your hand. Sorry, a little higher though, if you could. 5. All those against? Passes 5-2.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the following amendment that was previously adopted by the City Council at the 3/21/22 meeting, that residential facilities be allowed only with special exception.
Second.
Motion from Councilor Hawes. I've got a second from Councilor Milks. Any debate? None asked for a vote. All those in favor of rescinding the amendment, please raise your hand. Opposed? Passes 5-2.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the following amendment that was previously adopted by the City Council at the 3/21/20 meeting, that lodging houses be allowed only with special exception.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Second from Councilor
Moran.
Moran, thank you. Is there any debate, comment? None being asked for a vote. All those in favor of the motion to rescind? All those opposed? Passes 5-2.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the following amendment that was previously adopted by the City Council at the 3/21/22 meeting, that personal services are allowed only with special exceptions.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Councilor Milks. Any comment, discussion? None being asked for a vote, a show of hands. All those in favor of the motion to rescind? All those opposed? Passes 5-2.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the following amendment that was previously adopted by the City Council at the 3/21/22 meeting, that age-restricted retail will not be allowed.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Councilor Milkson, second. Is there any comment? I will state on this one that we do have existing ordinances governing the location of age-restricted properties, specifically marijuana. If we'd like to remember, Mr. Manager, correct me if I'm wrong, 1,000 feet radius from a educational facility and another store, correct?
We recently changed the setback to 1,000 feet buffer. Eric, what is it on a school?
Yeah, I believe it's 750 on a school, and we went to 2,000 from other stores.
2,000 from other stores, 750, which has effectively stopped any growth in that industry on the retail side?
I don't think we've permitted a new site since then. I could
Okay.
have to check with the city clerk.
Okay. Great. I'd like to ask for a vote by show of hands. All those in favor of the rescinding? All those opposed? Passes 5-2.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the following amendment that was previously adopted by the City Council at the 3/21/22 meeting, that restaurants with over 30 seats will not be allowed.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second for Councilor Moore. Any comment? None being, I'll ask for a vote by show of hands. All those in favor? Opposed? Passes 4-3.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the following amendment that was previously adopted by the City Council at the 3/21/22 meeting, that parking requirements to read one space per dwelling unit unless there is a municipal or private off-street parking within 500 feet of the property.
Do I have a motion? I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Councilor Moore, okay. Any comment? Okay, I'd like to ask for all those in favor of rescinding the motion, please raise your hand. Opposed? Passes 5-2. Keep going. I just want to make sure that I have a full list of all the amendments made, but keep going.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the following amendment that was previously adopted by the City Council at 3/21/22, meaning that government offices allowed with special exception.
I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second for Councilor Milks. Any discussion? Debate? All those in favor of rescinding the motion, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Passes 5-2.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the following amendment that was previously adopted by the City Council at the 3/21/22 meeting, that under commercial use, to read any businesses and retail use limited to 1,500 square foot footprint and must have an upper floor residential unit with no drive-through access.
I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second for Councilor Moore. Discussion? Okay. All those in favor of rescinding the motion, please raise your hand. Opposed? Passes 4-3.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the following amendment that was previously adopted by the City Council at the 3/21/22 meeting, to include a provision capping density at no more than 14 dwelling units per net acre unless special exemption is granted by the Planning Board.
I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second for Councilor Milks. Any discussion? Okay, I'll ask for a vote. Show of hands. All those in favor? Opposed? Passes 5-2. Okay. Just to recap to the council, at this point in time, we have made motions and they have passed, rolling back all amendments made on the meeting of 3/21/2022. What we have in front of us now is the zone 4.2 as passed by the planning board and initially presented to this city council. Without any amendments to it, that would be a substantial change. I can't remember the legal term, Counselor. Now we have the exact language presented to us by the planning board.
Without text amendments.
Thank you, without text amendments. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to open this up to debate and conversation. We've talked about this quite a bit. I'd like to open up all those in opposition to this amended ordinance. Would you like to comment? Opposition? Councilor Whiting.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a little homework on the number of housing units that have been built. We're somewhere around 223 apartments since 2018. My understanding is there's about 198 in the pipeline. That may not include others that I'm unaware of. I'm certainly in favor of housing, but I think what we are trying to do here is excessive and way beyond what the comp plan I worked on was looking at. I think it's worthwhile to reduce the number of zones, and maybe we've gone too far with that. I think people value their neighborhoods. I think they feel like they're not being listened to. I think the planning board, when it had an original motion or an amendment to a motion that passed 4-3, it reflected a majority view, and then that was killed and revoted. So I am not behind this. I disagree with it.
Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I echo the good Councilor Whiting's sentiment, and also the comp plan is a plan, not a blueprint. And even though it's something that we are mandated that we've got to have, it can be adjusted to fit certain situations. The longer a comp plan is in use, it should be evaluated if those same goals and objectives are still into play, or if it should be the direction changed. I do not support these amendments. I mean, the way this issue we're voting on tonight is set up, because I don't think it does due justice to the neighborhoods that this is going to affect. And I didn't support it to how I was afraid that it may potentially, if investors came to New Auburn, how it was going to affect them. So I can't in good conscience support this.
Very good. I'd like to make before I turn into anybody who supports too, I think it's important, as I said earlier, I want to recapitulate this. I anticipate that after we have hearings from the other neighborhoods in which 4.2 is being proposed, that we will be able to collect a comprehensive list from all individuals and residents that are impacted, both for, against certain areas, put that list together, bring it back to the city council for debate, discussion, and then forward that revised list, whatever that might look like, we don't know, to the planning board for contemplation, planning, and then action. And that very well might mean amending the comprehensive plan and sending that back to a vote, and then implementing some changes. But we know that leveling that playing field, and there's a bit of data that we've been talking about too, saying that that's important to do in order to minimize, really minimize the surge, if you would, if there is any, on specific neighborhoods. You spread that out, you lessen the impact, and you can make thoughtful decisions. Because if you don't, if you just rezone marginalized neighborhoods, what happens is you cause displacement, further marginalization, and gentrification. So we do have to be cautious of that, and I want to make sure that there's a lot of studies out there that we're not the first and only people to do it in the country. Lots of people have, and the case studies are evident. We just might be the first ones in Maine. So who would like to speak in support of this before I call a roll call vote? Anybody? No? Okay, nobody would like to speak in favor. I'd like to, at this time, ask the clerk for a roll call vote.
Counselor Whiting.
No.
Counselor Hawes.
Yes.
Counselor Milks.
Yes.
Counselor Morin.
Yes.
Counselor Walker.
Yes.
Counselor Staples.
Yes.
Counselor Gary.
No.
The order passes by a vote on the second reading of 5-2. Now, on to new business. We have Order 46-32822022, directing the Planning Board to review the proposed text and map amendments to the Court Street City core of Auburn residential area, traditional neighborhood district areas, reviewing the T42 district text, and hold a public hearing and forward a recommendation back to the council. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion from Councilor Gary, second from Councilor Staples. Now, obviously, this can be deemed as conflicting to what has already passed, but I would recommend that we table this to a date certain. That way it's guaranteed to come back up in front of this body. Ideally, I think that's 90 days, which should, and Mr. Cousins correct us, to implement or at least notify all the other neighborhoods that are going into proposed T4.2. How long is that process going to last?
So we're workshopping those other 4 areas with the planning board on the 12th of April. We would start to schedule those for public hearing in May. I need to get the mailing list together to understand how many notifications are going out, and we'll try to split those up into probably May and June for planning board. I think it would be helpful if the planning board had a direction to also help frame this T42B set of standards, but that's up to you if that's what you're looking for or not.
To help frame T4.2 set of standards. I think if we table this for a period of 120 days, based upon 120 days, will come back in front of us. But I also think that on the April 4th meeting, we can have an order put together directing the planning board to start compiling lists of potential edits and changes to overall T.4, which could include T4.2B. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? Okay, so I want to make sure it's covered. I want to make sure that it doesn't go away. Okay, so we can keep reviewing this. But that's a suggestion. I'm not making the motion. Someone else would have to make that motion if they want it on the table for 120 or whatever period of time.
Is 120 enough for you, Eric?
So I think we will definitely have work done towards that end to report back to you, and we should be able to come back for a public hearing around that time.
Well, and we'll table it, we'll bring it back up, and then we can amend that motion based upon all the data that we've received so far from constituents, debate it, and then send it out to planning board. So it's still going to be about a 30-day period after that as well. Good? Well, again, someone will have to make the motion.
I'd like to make the motion to order 4603282022 T42B 120-day
Table?
table.
Okay. I have a motion on the floor to table order 4603282022 for 120 days. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Councilor Hawes. Debate, discussion? Ask for a vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? Councilor Staples, I didn't capture your vote.
I was too slow. I'm in favor.
Okay, so 5 in favor, 2 opposed. The motion to table for 120 days passes. This time I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I got a motion from Councilor Walker, second from Councilor Milks. All those in favor say aye. Aye. This body stands adjourned. Thank you very much.